Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. Welcome to my YouTube guitar building channel. In today's episode, I'm going to be covering part 7 of my 4-string bass guitar build. And that means I'm going to be gluing the fretboard onto the neck, which, as you can see, I've already done. So through the miracle of modern editing technology, we'll go back in time and I'll show you how I did it. When I'm going to glue a fretboard onto a neck, I like to make sure I have everything set up in front of me. I've got my clamping caul, the neck, the fretboard, my truss rod, my clamps, the glue that I'm going to use, and some salt. And you'll see why in a minute. The glue that I'm going to be using is Titebond Original. And I like to use this because it has a shorter working time than the other Titebond wood glues. For example, Titebond 3, even though it has better water resistance, it has a much longer working time. And when it comes to fretboards, I prefer to have a shorter working time, because the way I'm going to do this is when I place the fretboard onto the neck, I'm going to make sure that it's positioned correctly. Then I'm just going to lightly tighten down 3 clamps, one at each end and one in the middle, just lightly, just enough to hold the fretboard in place. And I'll wait about 5 to 10 minutes for the glue to set up. Then I can start adding all the rest of my clamps, tighten it down a little bit more, and I'm good to go. Because the thing about wood glue is this stuff can be really slippery. And if you're not careful, your fretboard can slip around as you apply clamping pressure. And sometimes you won't even notice that at first. You clamp it down, everything looks good, you'll walk away, come back a few hours later, and your fretboard has shifted. And at that point, you're done. you're going to have to start over, because it's really difficult to get the fretboard off after that. So first thing I'm going to do is install my truss rod. Now when I install the truss rod, I'm going to apply some silicone at each end, and that way, once the rod has been installed and that glue has dried, the silicone glue is dried, the rod isn't going to rattle around. It's going to stay put. And that's especially important when there's no tension on the rod, because they have a tendency to slide around. And at the end where the adjustment nut is, I've placed the glue in the slot, so it's going to be just behind the adjustment nut, because I don't want the glue to interfere with the adjustment nut. Instead, I want it to pack in around this area so that the neck or the truss rod isn't going to slide around in that slot. So what I'm going to do now is cover the truss rod with a piece of masking tape. And the reason for that is because I don't want any of the wood glue to get down into that slot and dry around the truss rod, because silicone glue is going to remain flexible. So it's okay if you get that around the truss rod, but wood glue is going to dry much more brittle, and that could interfere with how the truss rod works. So I place a piece of masking tape just over the slot. It's about 1/2 inch wide. Next, I'm going to start to apply my glue, and I'm just going to put out a little bit of glue. You don't have to put a ton of glue on here, and you don't have to put glue on both the neck and the fretboard. You just need just like what you're seeing me do here. Then I'm going to use my pinky. First, I'll move this out of the way. I'm going to use my pinky to spread the glue around. And this is a trick I learned from Robert Benedetto years ago. Use your pinky to spread the glue if you don't have a glue brush, because after you're done and you're handling things, you're not going to really be touching it with your pinky. If you used your index finger, for example, there's more of a chance of getting glue all over the place. And I'm just going to spread that around, try to keep it as consistent as possible. Do both sides. And the key here is you don't want to put so much glue on here that the squeeze out is just going to be a mess. You want to try to gauge the amount of glue, and really the best way to do that is through experience. But yeah, I see guys putting a lot of glue all over the neck and then all over the back of the fretboard, thinking that that's the correct way to do it. But then they end up with so much glue all over the place that it's just a huge waste. So once we get it spread out like this, I can then remove the masking tape, because we're not going to leave that in there, contrary to what some people think. And then I'm just going to spread a little bit of glue around the end of the truss rod where the nut is here at the headstock. Now I'm going to take my table salt. Some of you have probably seen this done before. This is an old woodworker's trick. But you take just a tiny pinch, not a whole lot, and you sprinkle a few grains in a few spots along the length of the neck. What this is going to do is it's going to prevent the fretboard from trying to slide side to side as I clamp down the fretboard. And because salt is a mineral that is fragile, it's a fragile mineral, it will eventually dissolve as this glue sets up. The glue, the moisture in the glue will cause it to dry. Now I'm going to take my clamping caul and I'm going to set the neck down into the clamping caul just like you see here. And I'm going to brace the heel with some popsicle sticks, because there's a little bit of a gap between the bottom of the heel and the top of my clamping caul. And by the way, this clamping caul is something I made on my CNC machine years ago, specifically for this purpose, for clamping or supporting the back of the neck as I clamp the fretboard. So now I can take my clamps and I'm going to place one in the center, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of pressure, not a whole lot. I'm going to make sure that my fretboard is lined up the way it's supposed to be. Then I'll place another clamp at this end. Again, just light pressure, making sure that the fretboard isn't going to slip. Adjust if necessary, a little bit more clamping pressure. And then I'll place one at this end. Actually, I'm going to have to flip that over. And we're just going to, just a little bit of pressure, just enough to firmly hold it into place. And we're going to do that just long enough for the glue to start to set up. And that's going to take about 5 to 10 minutes. See, I barely have any pressure on here. But you can sort of see the glue starting to squeeze out here. The key to success is to have a perfectly flat surface on the neck and a perfectly flat surface on the bottom of the fretboard, so that when you bring the two together, there's not going to be any gaps as the fretboard is clamped down. So that's probably good enough for now. Now I'll wait for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'm going to add the rest of my clamps and tighten everything down when I'm sure that my fretboard is aligned correctly. And I can tell just by looking at it that it's pretty well lined up. All right, well, the glue has been tacking up for about 5 minutes now, so I'm confident I can totally ratchet down these clamps and not have to worry about the fretboard slipping. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few more. And when I say ratchet down, I'm not putting so much pressure as to potentially crack the wood or to squeeze all the glue out and starve the mating surfaces of glue. I'm just putting enough pressure to make sure that I have good contact between the two pieces, because the one thing I don't want to have is a noticeable gap or glue seam, which can be really obvious when you're gluing maple to maple. I'm not saying I'll get rid of that completely, but I should be able to greatly minimize it. And I know some of you who are watching this are probably going crazy because I'm not wiping off that squeeze out with a damp cloth like they show on all those weekend woodworking shows on TV. That's the worst thing you can do, because when you take a damp rag and try to wipe off that glue, you're pushing some of the glue, well, you're mixing it with the moisture in the cloth, and then you're pushing it into the wood fibers where it's going to dry and become almost impossible to remove. So then when you put any sort of a stain or a finish over the top of it, that stain and finish isn't going to adhere properly to wherever that residual glue has dried into the wood. So I always make it a point to wait till that glue has pretty much dried, and then I'll take either a rasp file and just knock off the squeeze out that's dried, or I'll take a sharp chisel and slice it off. And there's no issues with the residual glue affecting the absorption of any finishes that I might apply to this neck later on. So now here I don't have one of those little rubber pieces to protect the wood, so I'm just going to use an eraser. And there's an old saying, and you hear people say this all the time: there's no such thing as having too many clamps. Yeah, there is, because you run out of room. That's logic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry. I could remove these clamps in about an hour or two, because that's all the time it takes for Titebond Original to fully set up under clamping pressure. Anything after that is just a waste of time. So I'll probably come back in a couple of hours and pull these clamps off, and hopefully at that point I'll be able to remove that squeeze out without any issues. Normally when I glue a fretboard to a neck, I use a special clamping caul on the top of the fretboard, which places all the pressure from clamping along the edges of the neck. That way there's no seams. However, this is a one-off base, and I didn't have a caul long enough for clamping this. So in the future, if I do more of these necks, I'll probably make a caul specifically for it. At this point, the wood glue is about 90% dry, so I can take a really sharp chisel and just slice off that wood glue. However, you've got to be really careful with a chisel. If you get the angle wrong, you can gouge the wood. So not only can you use a chisel, but you might feel safer using like a rasp file. And this is a Japanese Iwasaka file. It's the half round style, medium cut. And I'll just use that to scrape off that partially dried wood glue. All right, well, I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in today's episode. I think we're at a good stopping point. So what I'm going to talk about in the next episode is I'm going to be adding the side marker dots onto the neck, and then I'm going to do some finish sanding, and I'll probably start out with like a 150 grit and work myself up to 400 grit. It should go pretty easily because the surface finish is pretty nice on this neck, so shouldn't take too much effort. However, one part that I'm not going to sand is going to be the surface of the fretboard, the radius. That's going to be treated a little bit differently, and I'll be talking about that in a lot more detail in a future episode. So until the next episode, as always, please consider giving me a thumbs up if I've entertained you and educated you. And of course, if you don't subscribe to the channel but like videos on building guitars, be sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell for notifications. Make sure your notifications in YouTube are switched on to accept notifications anytime I post up a new video. And that's usually only twice a week, so it's not like I'm going to be flooding your email. And if you would like to help show this channel some support, because these videos take quite a bit of time and effort to produce them, and one way to keep me going is to help finance the effort. And you can do that by visiting eguitarplants.com and purchasing a plan either for a guitar or one of the many different tools that I use to build guitars. And even if you don't make whatever plan you purchase, just know that your purchase is helping to support the channel. And if you would like something a little more tangible, something you can wear, consider purchasing a Highline Guitars t-shirt. They're displayed down below on my merch shelf. And if you can't see that merch shelf, there is a link in the description of where you can go to purchase one. So as always, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I will see you soon.